As many of you already know, I've been a huge fan of the Nintendo Switch and have been since I got my hands on it just a few months after launch. And for the last 6 or so years, this has been my main source of gaming. Now don't get me wrong, I have an Xbox, I have a gaming PC, I even have a Steam Deck, and none of these have swayed me from the Nintendo Switch. But in the last month and a half, that's kind of all changed. And today I want to go through the couple of reasons why I'm just not picking this up as much anymore. And the first big reason is indie games. Now, whilst this has been a pretty fantastic year for gaming on the Switch, it's also been a pretty terrible one in terms of certain indie games. Now, don't get me wrong, there have been Nintendo first-party games that look incredible and perform incredibly well on the Switch this year. There's also been some indie games that have absolutely rocked the Switch as well. But there have been an awful lot of utterly terrible Switch ports going on recently. And honestly, it's getting pretty frustrating to be a Nintendo Switch owner. Now, bad ports are nothing new to the Nintendo Switch, but what is new is the sheer number of them we've been getting recently. And I think that just comes down to the fact that the Nintendo Switch is beginning to show its age. And either we get indie games with huge bugs that seem to be Switch only, frame drops, graphics issues, or just insanely long loading times, or we just get the indie games way later on the Switch than every other console. We're talking like 8+ months for the average indie game at the moment. And it's gotten me to wonder, first of all, is it worth the price we start paying for these games on the Switch? And second of all, how much longer is it going to be to a Switch 2? Because honestly, this is getting really annoying. So as I said before, despite the fact that I own countless other ways to play games, the Switch has been my go-to for the last 5 or so years. That was until I got my hands on the Steam Deck OLED. Now, I do already own a normal Steam Deck, and whilst I liked it, in my previous review you'll see that I had a few big issues that just meant I rarely found myself picking it up over my Switch. Like, for example, I own the Nintendo Switch OLED, and playing on the Steam Deck just felt like a downgrade because the screen just didn't look as good. But other than the screen, by far one of my biggest issues with the Steam Deck was the fact that it wasn't really portable. Most of the games I was playing had a battery life of under 3 hours, which meant that it was pretty useless when it came to long travels, and the fact that the fans were really loud, which kind of made me feel a little bit embarrassed about playing it on the train. But when Valve announced the OLED, we found out that not only is the screen bigger and better, but that the fans would be quieter and the battery life would be better as well. So I decided I was going to buy it and give it a shot. And despite the fact that Valve downplayed this and said this wasn't really that much of an upgrade compared to the normal Steam Deck, I found the differences to actually be massive. And I found myself often picking this up over my Nintendo Switch. Now, I'm not a huge techie person, so I'll put the specifics of the Steam Deck versus the Steam Deck OLED on the screen, but instead I just want to talk to you about my experience with it. Now, the first thing you might notice compared to the other Steam Deck is the fact that visually it does look a little bit different. The buttons are grey instead of white, the base of the joysticks is black instead of white as well, the bezels around the screen itself are much smaller in order to accommodate a bigger screen size, the power button is bright red instead of the exact same colour as the shell, and one small thing I really like is the fact that the LED light will change colour when the Steam Deck is fully charged. But one of the biggest changes that I've personally noticed has been the weight of the Steam Deck. We knew it was going to be a little bit lighter, but what I didn't expect was how noticeable this weight difference actually is. For me, someone with small hands, I found it so much easier to hold, so much more comfortable to keep up, just by this small change in weight, and it's genuinely made such a difference. It is noticeably heavier than the Switch though, but this is a lot more manageable. This is also considerably quieter than the original Steam Deck. Now, I believe this is because this just runs less hot than the Steam Deck does, so it doesn't need as powerful fans to keep it cool. But this has meant that I've been taking this out with me a lot more. I don't really feel funny playing this on the plane anymore or the train because you can't hear the fans over the general noise, which has been nice. Again, this is louder than the Switch when that's at full blast, but much more realistic to kind of take with you. By far the biggest upgrade though is definitely the screen. And much like when you change from the normal Nintendo Switch to the OLED Switch, this makes such a difference. Not only are the colors more vibrant, you can also have it at a higher refresh rate. The screen can also go much brighter as well, meaning this is easier to play in bright conditions, like if you want to sit outside and play it in the garden in the summer. This coupled with the fact that the battery life is also longer, like when I play Coral Island, I can get a whole hour extra of gameplay out of the OLED compared to my normal Switch. All this combined means that this is just a far more portable device. Now, I went for the 1TB version, which has an anti-glare screen, which is why it looks a little bit funny when I'm filming it here. Now, this essentially means when you compare it to the Switch, it doesn't have a glossy coating to the screen, which I personally prefer, but some people say this lessens the quality of the screen somewhat. So just something to keep in mind when considering which one you want to buy. Now, kind of unfortunately, the Steam Deck and the Steam Deck OLED are the exact same size. Now, I say unfortunately because I feel like I have pretty small hands, and I must admit I find the Steam Deck less comfortable than the Switch. The beauty about a console being too small is it's really easy to add things on to make it more comfortable. Like, I will personally always play my Switch with a grip, and these two together are really comfortable. The issue with the Steam Deck is because it's too big, there's not really a lot you can do to kind of help with it. Adding grips is only going to really make it wider and bigger, and isn't really going to help the issue that the joysticks are pretty far up. That being said, it's definitely not impossible to play. I just find it a little bit harder. Now, I'm by no means a tech expert, but I do feel like the Steam Deck OLED runs games slightly better than the normal Steam Deck. This makes sense, the internals are not identical, so it might be that it just is slightly more powerful, but it's definitely not something to upgrade between the two for. Now, all of these things about the Steam Deck versus the Switch are great, but where the Steam Deck really stands out against the Switch is performance, specifically for indie games. As I said earlier, the Switch's main issue at the moment is it's just not running indie games well. And thankfully, because this is basically a PC inside of a portable unit, all those problems have gone with this. Not only is it more powerful than the Switch, but because it's not a console, you're able to fine-tune your experience in the game to make it run exactly how you want to see it. In theory, almost every game you can play on a PC will be playable on the Steam Deck, so long as it's on Steam. And each game you go to play on the Steam Deck will actually have a different rating to determine how playable it is on the device. So either it will have a green tick that tells you that it is completely compatible and you won't have to touch the settings whatsoever. Some games will have an amber warning where it basically tells you what functions don't work so well on the Steam Deck. So sometimes it doesn't support the native resolution. Sometimes you'll just have to bring up the keyboard to type in it every so often. Or you might have to change a few settings around in the menu to get it to run properly. And finally, you have games that state that they are completely not playable on the deck at all, and you can't even download them. From my experience though, you can get almost any game you want to play to somewhat work on the Steam Deck, but most of the games that are on the Switch are also fully ready for the Steam Deck as well, and all of which run the games at a higher frame rate, better graphics than the Switch does as well. I do think it is worth mentioning the price of this though. The Steam Deck OLED starts at £479, which is significantly more expensive than the Switch is itself. But then again, I'm not sure that's a completely fair comparison. The Steam sales are far better than the Nintendo Switch sales, especially when it comes to indie games, meaning that over time, you're probably going to end up spending less on games on the Steam Deck than you would do on the Switch itself. So overall, what are my thoughts on Steam Deck versus Switch in 2023? It's kind of mixed. Because although right now I'd say if you're looking to buy a portable device, buy the Steam Deck OLED over the Nintendo Switch, this comes with the biggest asterisk ever. And that is, make sure if you're buying this anytime soon, you consider the possibility that Nintendo might come out with a Nintendo Switch 2 in 2024. And just think, if you spent your money on this, would you regret it if a Switch 2 was announced next year? So that's one thing to consider, but this definitely runs indie games way better than a Nintendo Switch does. This is also kind of an in-between between a console and a gaming PC, so it's a good way to sort of dip your toe into the Steam marketplace. Although ultimately the benefits of having something like a gaming PC or a gaming laptop is it's useful for things other than just gaming, which this isn't really. In terms of a Steam Deck OLED versus the Steam Deck, I wouldn't really say this is worth the upgrade considering its price from a Steam Deck to an OLED, although I love everything extra that they've added into it. But I would definitely say buy this version and not the normal Steam Deck if you're going to buy one from scratch. But if I'm being honest, although I love this thing to pieces, it will never fully replace my Switch. I have so much nostalgia for the Nintendo Switch, and a lot of games do run well on it. And obviously, we still have a ton of Nintendo Switch exclusives coming in 2024, but it's getting harder to be a Nintendo Switch only gamer. And I do think this is a perfect way to dip your toes into trying something a little bit different. Let me know in the comments down below if you're tempted to buy one, and if you want to see my favorite games of 2023, click this video here.